Today's episode is in part brought to you by Shortform. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of Book Notes. And today we're going to cover a really delicious piece of work. And in this video, I just simply want to provide an introduction, a general introduction to some of the works of Virginia Woolf. A lot of people know this about writers like Proust or Virginia Woolf or James Joyce. There's this misconception that you either get these authors or you don't get them. You either have a way with their voice or you're going to grow to hate the book, which is not entirely true. A big part of literature is about finding pattern, is about finding ways of representing reality, is about finding a way of interpreting reality. That is essentially literature's job. It's molding our external experiences into something more understandable, into something that we could use. Conceptualize, create a new understanding of reality where it transforms our daily experiences. So for this writer, Virginia Woolf, when I first started reading, I was sort of like put off by the way she described things, or put off by the seemingly stream of consciousness descriptions. It's very hard to grab onto a plot point, and it's very hard to find out the point of her writing. Personally, I enjoy a story a lot more than some of these prose fiction, should I say. But after reading pieces like Marcel Proust's Swann's Way, after reading stuff like No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, or reading pieces of essays by Joan Didion, I grew more and more comfortable with this idea of representing reality through a very meticulous sort of prose construction work, crafting prose to such an extent that it, in a sense, forces you to concentrate or forces you to look at a part of reality and forces you to find story within the mundane. If we think of reality as a ball of different sounds, different feelings, different emotions, different human interactions, works like The Waves, works like Swann's Way by Marcel Proust. Their job is simply to reconceptualize this piece of reality into something that we could put our fingers on. Sort of reminds us some of the more important things that we're actually pursuing in life. Sort of reminds us what it means to be a human being. Sort of reminds us that, hey, there's a higher purpose standing on something that's more solid than our daily matters, than, trying to pay the bills, than trying to go to the job or go to your job, or trying to simply make ends meet. And getting yourself anchored in something mundane is completely different from getting distracted by matters of the mundane. And these pieces of literature, in a sense, reconceptualize what is mundane. They reconceptualize the mundane into something that's actually working toward a higher purpose. And with that understanding, you could live through the mundane with a brand new appreciation. And that's why I think it's very important to understand it before you read Virginia Woolf. Story isn't necessarily the main point of her works, but the whole point is to force you to slow down and to read into the experiences of these characters, and to derive a brand new appreciation or recontextualize your mundane experiences. Speaking of which, now let's talk about the structure of the novel, which I think the structure really helps with achieving this grand purpose of recontextualizing reality. The story of the book is mainly about the coming of age of 6 different characters in the book, where the entire story was mostly told through dialogue. And at the start of each chapter, there is a paragraph of italic text. That's the only place where Virginia Woolf sort of employed external description. For example, on page number 1, it started with, the sun had not yet risen, the sea was indistinguishable from the sky, except that the sea was slightly creased, as if a cloth had wrinkles in it. Gradually, as the sky widened, a dark line lay on the horizon dividing the sea from the sky, and a gray cloth became barred with thick strokes moving, one after another, beneath the surface, following each other, pursuing each other perpetually. I think in a sense these beginning paragraphs grounds the reader into a reality. And because the rest of the book was told through dialogue, with that contextualization of the scene, with that contextualization of the setting, and with that contextualization of the external elements, it's in a sense playing this distinction between the inner world, outer world. So at the start of each chapter, there is some of these delicious descriptions of, for example, a cabin, for example, a chair, for example, waves crashing against the shore. So if you're a sucker for pretty prose, these paragraphs will impress the crap out of you. And also what's really interesting is that these characters, as they move through the book, as they told their stories in a very sequential fashion, as they're coming of age, their voice also started to change their voice also, started to grow with them. Silly conceptions that they had in previous chapters, in a sense, matured over time and grew with the characters. And at the end of the book, there was this really, really beautiful synergy of all of these characters coming together. And at the end of the book, that one of the characters called Bernard actually completed the final chapter, actually narrated the final chapter. All 6 characters had very distinct concerns. All 6 characters have varying different levels of different ways of interpreting reality and different ways of viewing things. For example, one of the characters named Neville was obsessed with a very precise understanding of reality, and as he spent paragraphs talking about deriving the perfect understanding of Latin phrases, deriving the perfect understanding or a very academic understanding of a certain book, of a certain text, or this desire to, I quote, explore the exactitude of the Latin language and step firmly upon the well-laced sentences and pronounce the explicit, sonorous hexameters of Virgil, of Lucretius, and chant with a passion that is never obscure or formless. This very scholastic attitude of Neville was, in a sense, contrasted with a sort of concrete observation of reality possessed by a character named Bernard in the book. Here's a little paragraph in the voice of Bernard. I quote, "The fact is that I have little aptitude for reflection. I require the concrete in everything. It is so only that I lay hands upon the world. A good phrase, however, seems to me to have an independent existence." If you're interested in these characters, I would encourage you to read this book yourself and to explore the intricacy between these 2 characters. And these 2 characters, well, they were 2 of my favorite characters in the book. And I think in the 2nd chapter of the book, when these 2 went to school, there was a beautiful moment where the 2, in a sense, compared their understanding of poetry from a very, scholastic understanding of poetry or a very academic understanding of poetry to a very writerly or artistic understanding of poetry. And there was just this beautiful reconciliation from 2 different ends of 2 different minds. And to bring this video to a close, I think it's very important for us to talk about the authorial voice, or what was Woolf trying to achieve with this book. For me, this is a very quotable book because all the sentences in this book, all the dialogue and the prose and the descriptions were just so meticulously crafted. Each moment brought out a different sensation. Some sensations were, revelations of understanding, a brand new way of understanding a mental state, or a way of understanding poetry, or a way of understanding the role of literature. But also there's a solid sense of recognition in this text, in which it is something that I've experienced before. But now Woolf had given me the language to talk about these things. And I think below the different concerns of these 6 characters, below the tragic death of one of their friends, and below all of these layers of mundane concerns, Woolf's authorial voice, or the way that these sentences were crafted, below the differences in voices, or below the differences between these characters, there was still this sense of conveying something that's more eternal, more truthful, and more important. The Waves by Virginia Woolf, for me, is a grand exercise in empathy, because it is jumping through different perspectives and different concerns and different kinds of people with different kinds of ideas. After reading this book, I feel like I'm slower to judge people based on their ideas, slower to judge people's character simply based on some external appearance. Because below each opinion and below each character trait and below each idea, there is a fascinating mind at work. There's something more universal than just our singular concerns. And through this exercise of jumping through different characters and jumping through different experiences based on different concerns, Woolf, in a sense, forced us to conceptualize reality into multiple different frames. And I think if you're interested in her work, please realize that these pieces of work are pretty difficult, and sometimes you need a few years just to digest one of these pieces of works. But at the end, if you've spent the time, if you've spent the energy, and if you've spent the correct amount of hours thinking about these things, or exercising empathy, or exercising living from different viewpoints of different people, it will change your life, but in a way that just seeps under your skin and slowly remodifies your relationship with reality. And it slowly broadens your horizons and slowly broadens your ability to jump between multiple perspectives, your ability to reason, and your ability to think critically. And at the end of today's video, I'm super happy to introduce you guys to an incredible book I've been reading and tell you a little bit about today's video sponsor, Shortform. Shortform is a platform that gives some really, really succinct and to-the-point summaries on nonfiction books. And this incredible book that I've read recently was called How to Read Literature Like a Professor. And the author's main argument was basically the fact that over time, as you read more, as you spot patterns of plot, character development, archetypes, and the ways that the authors describe reality. There are overarching themes, and there are overarching archetypes, and there are overarching things that you need to look out for when you're tackling pieces of literature. For me, short form is simply a repository of notes, a repository of summaries that frees me up to read the actual nonfiction book cover to cover without worrying about taking notes, without worrying about noting everything down, and without worrying about missing something. We live in an age where rapidly mastering skills is increasingly important, and I really do think short form provides an excellent service for people who want to retain what they've learned and to want to reference back to a web of knowledge so that they don't have to waste their time rereading these books cover to cover again. And right now, as a viewer of this channel, Shortform is offering subscribers a 20% discount if you follow the link in the description down below. And I recommend you to check out the summary for how to read literature like a professor after you've read the book yourself. And I really encourage you to use all the tips from how to read literature like a professor to your own literary readings. And in the future, I look forward to doing more of these in-depth analyses of books I've been reading for university or for my personal pleasure, and continue the book notes series and continue this entire venture of deriving pleasure out of reading. Nevertheless, this is the episode on Virginia Woolf's The Waves, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and I will be signing off right now.